The desert didn't care about my freedom, my pain, or the man dying at my feet. Marcus Whitfield, the monster who stole my family, now begging for my mercy under the merciless Nevada sun. The sun was a cruel bastard, beating down on the Nevada desert like it had a personal vendetta against every living thing. My boots crunched against the cracked earth, each step kicking up a puff of dust that clung to my sweat-soaked shirt. I'd been riding for days, my old mare Daisy plodding along beneath me, her hooves dragging through the sand. She was as tired as I was, but we didn't have a choice. Oregon was calling, a promised land of green hills and freedom, far from the chains that had bound me for 35 years. I was Ezra Thorne, a cattle hand now, a free man since Lincoln's proclamation shattered the shackles of slavery. But freedom, it tasted like ash when you had no one to share it with, no home to claim, no family to hold close. Before we dive into this epic tale, smash that like button if you're ready for a wild ride, drop a 1 in the comments to show your love, and stick around till the end for a twist that'll blow your mind. I'd left the plantation behind, left the memories of blood and whips and the man who'd made my life a living hell. Marcus Whitfield. His name alone was enough to make my fists clench, my jaw tighten until my teeth ached. He was the devil in a pressed blue coat, strutting across his Georgia estate like he owned the sky itself. He'd bought me when I was 7, torn me from my mother's arms, and spent the next 28 years trying to break me. Whippings that left my back a map of scars, a branding iron that seared his initials into my shoulder when I dared to run. And worst of all, the day he sold my Sarah, my heart, my everything, along with our unborn child. He told me they died in childbirth. For 15 years, I carried that grief like a stone in my chest, heavy and unyielding. But I was free now, or so they said, free to ride west, to chase a dream that felt more like a ghost. That morning, as Daisy and I trudged through the endless sea of sand and sagebrush, I saw something that made my gut twist. Smoke. Not the thick, rolling kind from a campfire, but a thin, patchy wisp curling up from behind a ridge of red rock. My first instinct was to keep moving. The desert was no place for curiosity. Curiosity got you killed, especially out here where bandits and natives roamed. But something pulled at me, a nagging itch I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the loneliness, the need for something, anything, to break the monotony of heat and silence. I slid off Daisy, tied her to a scraggly mesquite bush, and crept toward the ridge, my revolver heavy in my hand. The air was still, the only sound the faint whistle of wind through the rocks. I climbed the ridge, my boots slipping on loose shale, and peered over the edge. I expected wreckage, burned wagons, scattered supplies, maybe bodies picked clean by vultures. What I found was worse. There, crawling through the sand like a wounded animal, was Marcus Whitfield, the man who'd haunted my nightmares for decades. His fancy blue uniform was shredded, caked with blood and dust. His gray hair was matted, his face pale as death. The mighty colonel, who once strode through his fields with a whip in one hand and my life in the other, was reduced to this, a broken thing, gasping for breath in the middle of nowhere. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Every scar on my back burned fresh, every memory of his cruelty flooding back. The crack of his whip, the cold laughter as he sold Sarah to a trader, the way he'd looked at me, not as a man, but as property, a tool to be used and discarded. And now here he was, at my mercy. "Water," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper, his cold blue eyes locking onto mine. Those eyes, they were the same ones that had watched me bleed, watched me beg, watched me break. But now they were different, desperate, afraid. I stood there, my hand hovering over the canteen at my hip. Every fiber of my being screamed to walk away, to let the desert claim him. Let him choke on his own blood, let the sun bake him until his bones bleached white. Justice. That's what it would be. Justice for the years he stole, for the family he ripped rapides away from me. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way his hands trembled, clawing at the sand. Maybe it was the hollow sound of his breathing, like a man already half dead. Or maybe it was something deeper, something I couldn't name. "Who are you?" he rasped, squinting up at me. His voice was weak, but it still carried that old arrogance, that assumption of power. I stepped closer, my shadow falling over him. "You know who I am," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my chest. His eyes widened, the color draining from his face. "Ezra," he whispered, and the sound of my name on his lips made my blood run cold. That's right, Ezra Thorne, the boy you bought when I was 7, the man you tried to break for 28 years. He closed his eyes, his head falling back against the sand. For a moment I thought he was gone, that the desert had finished what the natives started. But then he spoke, and his words hit me like a bullet. I know what you're thinking, and you'd be right to leave me here. But before you go, there's something you need to know about your wife. The world stopped. Sarah. My Sarah. Dead for 15 years, or so he'd told me. My hand tightened around the canteen, my knuckles white. What about my wife? The words came out as a growl, low and dangerous. Whitfield tried to sit up, but collapsed with a groan, blood seeping through his torn shirt. Arrow wounds, deep and ugly, marked his side and shoulder. The natives had left him for dead, but he was still clinging to life, still clinging to his secrets. Water. First, he gasped. Then I'll tell you everything. I knelt beside him, my mind a storm of fury and confusion. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, a final manipulation from a man who'd built his life on lies. But the mention of Sarah had ripped open a wound I thought had scarred over. I lifted the canteen to his lips, watching him drink, his throat working desperately to swallow. He coughed, blood speckling his chin, and I pulled the canteen away. Talk, I said, my voice deadly calm. She didn't die. In childbirth, he said, the words spilling out in a rush. The baby lived too. A girl. They're in Albuquerque, with a family. The Martinezes. The desert went silent, the wind itself holding its breath. My heart stopped, then started again, pounding like a war drum. You're lying, I said, but my voice shook, betraying the hope I didn't dare feel. I sold them, he continued, his eyes fixed on mine. To a family in Albuquerque. They needed help, wanted the child. Sarah's alive, Ezra, your daughter too. She'd be 15 now. 15 years. 15 years of believing they were dead, of mourning them in the dark corners of my soul. 15 years of thinking my wife and child were buried in some unmarked grave while this monster knew they were alive. My vision blurred, my hands shaking with a rage so fierce I could barely breathe. I could kill him, right here, right now. Wrap my hands around his throat and watch the life drain from those cold eyes. No one would know. The desert would swallow him whole, and I'd ride away, free of his shadow forever. But if he was telling the truth, if Sarah and Lena were alive, then he was the only link I had to them, the only way I'd find them. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and looked out at the endless expanse of sand and rock. The sun was sinking, painting the sky with streaks of fire. We were 2 days from the nearest town, maybe 3 on foot. My canteen was half empty, barely enough for one man to survive the journey. And Whitfield was dying, his wounds festering, his fever rising. But I needed him alive. I needed his answers. You're going to tell me exactly where they are, I said, my voice low and hard. Every detail. And you're going to help me find them. He managed a weak smile, blood staining his teeth. That's going to be difficult. I can barely move. Then you better find the strength, I said, turning back to Daisy. I grabbed my bedroll and the few supplies I had, a handful of jerky, some hardtack biscuits, a knife. Not enough to get us both to Albuquerque, but I'd make it work. I had to. I knelt beside him again, checking his wounds. The arrow in his side was still lodged deep, the flesh around it swollen and red. This needs to come out, I said. He nodded, his face tight with pain. I know. I'd seen wounds like this before, patched up my brothers in the slave quarters when the overseers didn't care enough to call a doctor. This is gonna hurt, I warned. Just do it, he grunted. I gripped the arrow shaft, steadied my hands, and pushed it through with one quick motion. He screamed, the sound echoing across the desert, but the arrow came out clean. I tore strips from his shirt to bandage the wound, working fast as the light faded. The desert nights were brutal, and we needed shelter. Why are you helping me? He asked suddenly, his voice weak but sharp. After everything I did, why not leave me to die? I tied off the bandage, my hand steady despite the storm in my chest. Because you're the only one who knows where my family is, I said. And until I find them, you're the most valuable thing in this desert. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for the first time, I saw something other than cruelty in them. Fear, regret, maybe even shame. But I didn't care. I didn't want his redemption. I wanted my wife and daughter. I helped him to his feet, his weight heavy against my shoulder. He could barely stand, but we had to move. The natives might come back to finish their work, and I wasn't taking any chances. I led him to Daisy, tied him to the saddle, and started walking, the reins in my hand. The desert stretched out before us, vast and unforgiving, but for the first time in 15 years, I felt something other than grief. Hope. Fragile, dangerous hope. Sarah and Lena were out there, waiting for me, and I'd walk through hell itself to find them. The word alive echoed in my skull like a gunshot, ricocheting through every corner of my mind. Sarah, Lena, alive. For 15 years, I'd carried their deaths like a chain around my neck, each link forged from Marcus Whitfield's lies. My hands shook as I held the reins of my mare, Daisy, leading her through the Nevada desert. Whitfield was slumped in the saddle, tied down with strips of my own shirt to keep him from falling. His breathing was shallow, his face gray as the ash that dusted the ground. The arrow wounds in his side and shoulder wept blood, staining the bandages I'd wrapped around him. He was dying, no question about it, but I needed him to hold on. I needed the truth. The sun was a merciless hammer, pounding us with heat as we moved. My throat was dry, my canteen nearly empty, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the impossible hope of seeing Sarah again, of meeting my daughter, burned brighter than the desert sun. Talk, I said, my voice rough as the sand beneath my boots. You said Sarah and Lena are in Albuquerque. Where? With who? And why the hell did you lie to me? Whitfield's head lolled to the side, his eyes half open, glassy with fever. For a moment I thought he'd slipped too far to answer, but then he coughed, a wet, ugly sound, and spoke. The Martinezes, he rasped. A family in Albuquerque. Wealthy folks. Needed a housemaid. Wanted a child to raise as their own. Paid me $400 for Sarah and the baby. His words were a knife, twisting deep in my gut. $400. That's what my family was worth to him. A stack of bills, a transaction, a deal sealed while I was left to grieve ghosts. You sold them, I said, my voice low, dangerous. You told me they died. You let me believe my wife and child were gone, buried somewhere I'd never find. Why? He winced. Whether from pain or shame, I couldn't tell. Because you tried to run, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You and Sarah. You thought you could steal my property and walk away. I had to teach you a lesson, had to show you what happens when you defy me. The rage that surged through me was white hot, blinding. I stopped walking, my hands clenching the reins so tight Daisy snorted in protest. I could see it all. Sarah, pregnant, her eyes full of fire as we planned our escape. We'd almost made it too, hiding in the swamp for 2 nights before Whitfield's men dragged us back. The whipping that followed left me half dead, but it was his words that broke me. She's gone, Ezra, he'd said, his voice cold as ice. Died giving birth. The baby too. I'd believed him. God help me, I'd believed him, and I'd spent 15 years carrying that lie like a wound that never healed. You're a monster, I said, my voice trembling with the effort to keep from strangling him right there. You took everything from me. Whitfield's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in them. Regret, maybe, or something close to it. I know, he said, and I've paid for it every day since. But there's more, Ezra. Your daughter, Lena, She's special, smart as a whip. The Martinezes wrote to me over the years, told me how she reads everything she can get her hands on, writes letters to the local paper arguing for workers' rights. She's got your fire, your stubbornness. My heart stuttered at the thought of her. Lena, my daughter, 15 years old, with a mind sharp enough to challenge the world. I tried to picture her, Sarah's grace, my stubborn jaw, maybe her own spark that neither of us could claim. But the image was blurry, incomplete. I'd never seen her, never held her. And yet, she'd been out there, growing up, believing her father was dead or worse, that he'd abandoned her. She writes to you, Whitfield continued, his voice fading. Letters she never sends. Every week, for years, letters to a father she doesn't know. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My daughter, writing to me, pouring her heart onto pages that would never reach me. I wanted to scream, to curse Whitfield, to curse the world that let this happen. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more. Where are they? I demanded. Give me an address, a name, something I can use. He coughed again, blood speckling his lips. Albuquerque, he said. Calle del Sol, third house from the corner. Red door. The Martinezes. They've treated them well. Paid Sarah wages, sent Lena to school. But they're not free, Ezra, not truly. The contract I signed, it binds them to the Martinezes until I release them. I stopped dead, the rein slipping from my hands. What do you mean, not free? My voice was a growl, barely human. Whitfield's eyes fluttered closed, but he forced them open. The Emancipation Proclamation. It didn't apply to New Mexico territory. Private contracts still hold. I made sure of it. They can't leave Albuquerque without my say-so. The rage came back, hotter than before, but now it was mixed with something else. Fear. Fear that even if I found them, they'd still be trapped, still bound by Whitfield's cruelty. You're going to fix that, I said, stepping close, my shadow falling over him. You're going to tell me how to set them free? He nodded weakly. There's a letter with my lawyer in Albuquerque. If I die, it goes to Lena on her 16th birthday. Tomorrow. It tells her everything. Who you are, what I did. But if I make it there, I can sign papers to void the contract. Free them for good. Tomorrow. My daughter's 16th birthday. The thought of her reading that letter, learning the truth about her father, about the years stolen from us, it was too much. I couldn't let her think I'd abandoned her. Not for another day. I looked out at the desert, the horizon shimmering with heat. Albuquerque was 2 days away, maybe 3 with Whitfield's condition. My canteen was almost dry, my supplies dwindling. The natives who'd attacked him could still be out there tracking us, but none of that mattered. Sarah was alive, Lena was alive, and I'd dragged this dying man across every inch of this godforsaken desert to reach them. Hold on, I told him, my voice hard. You don't get to die yet, not until I have my family back. I adjusted the ropes holding him to the saddle, checked his bandages, and started walking again. The sand burned through my boots, the sun scorched my neck, but I didn't feel it. All I felt was the weight of those letters, those words Lena had written to a father she'd never known. I'd find her, I'd find Sarah, and I'd make sure they knew I'd never stopped loving them, not for a single day. The Nevada desert didn't care about my pain, my hope, or the dying man tied to my horse. It was a merciless beast, all sand and stone and blistering heat, ready to swallow us whole if we faltered. I trudged forward, my boots sinking into the soft earth, the reins of my mare, Daisy, cutting into my palms. Marcus Whitfield was a dead weight in the saddle, his head lolling with every step, his breathing a ragged whisper. The arrow wounds in his side and shoulder were festering, the bandages soaked with blood and pus. I'd seen men die from less, but I wouldn't let him go, not yet. He was my only link to Sarah and Lena, and I'd carry him to Albuquerque if it killed me. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into a furnace. My canteen was down to its last few sips, and I'd given most of it to Whitfield to keep him conscious. My lips were cracked, my tongue swollen, but I didn't care. Every step brought me closer to my family, to the life that had been stolen from me. I kept my eyes on the horizon, searching for any sign of water, shelter, anything to keep us alive. But the desert offered nothing, just endless dunes and jagged rocks, mocking me with their emptiness. Whitfield stirred, his voice barely audible. "Ezra, you don't have to do this. You could leave me." I didn't look at him. "Shut up," I said, my voice hoarse. "You don't get to decide what I do. You lost that right a long time ago." He coughed, a weak, pitiful sound. "I know what I did to you, to Sarah. I don't expect forgiveness. But I'm trying to make it right." His words were like a spark to dry tinder, igniting the rage I'd been holding back. "Make it right?" I snapped, stopping to glare at him. "You sold my wife, my child. You let me think they were dead for 15 years. You think dragging your sorry carcass to Albuquerque makes us even?" His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the old Whitfield, the cold, calculating man who'd branded me like cattle. But then his face softened, and he looked away. "No," he said quietly, "nothing will ever make it right. But Lena, she deserves to know her father." The mention of my daughter's name cooled my anger, just enough to keep me moving. Lena, 15 years old, writing letters to a man she thought was gone. I couldn't fail her now. By midday, the heat was unbearable, the air shimmering like a mirage. Daisy was slowing, her head drooping, her steps unsteady. I gave her the last of the water, knowing we'd both die without her. Whitfield was fading too, his skin hot to the touch, his words slurring into nonsense. I needed to find water, and soon. That's when I saw it, a faint green line on the horizon, a promise of life in this wasteland. A creek maybe, or a spring. It was miles away, but it was our only chance. I pushed on, my legs burning, my shoulders screaming from the weight of the reins. The silence of the desert was broken by a sound that made my blood freeze. Hoofbeats. Fast, rhythmic, coming from behind us. I yanked Daisy behind a cluster of rocks, my heart pounding. I untied Whitfield and pulled him down, his body limp against mine. "Stay quiet," I whispered, though I doubted he could hear me. 3 native warriors crested a ridge, their horses kicking up dust. They were tracking us, their eyes scanning the ground with the patience of hunters who knew their prey was close. My revolver felt heavy in my hand, its 6 bullets pitiful against 3 armed men. I had 2 choices: fight and likely die, leaving Sarah and Lena to wonder what happened to me, or hide and pray they passed us by. But as the warriors split up, fanning out to surround our position, I knew hiding wasn't an option. The first one appeared to my left, his rifle raised. I fired before he could, the shot echoing like thunder. He fell, but the sound drew the others. The second warrior came from the right, his horse charging. I fired twice, hitting him in the chest, but the third was already on me, his knife glinting in the sun. We went down hard, rolling in the sand, his blade inches from my throat. He was young, strong, his eyes burning with fury. My arms shook as I fought to hold him off, my strength fading fast. Just as the knife grazed my skin, a gunshot rang out. The warrior jerked, blood blooming on his chest, and collapsed. Behind him, Whitfield sat propped against a rock, my revolver smoking in his trembling hand. "Couldn't let them kill you," he gasped, his face gray as ash. "Not when you're so close." I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Whitfield had saved my life, the man I hated most in the world, the man who'd destroyed everything I loved. The irony was bitter, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. His wounds were bleeding again, his strength spent. I checked the bodies of the warriors, taking their water skins and a rifle. It wasn't much, but it would keep us alive a little longer. I hoisted Whitfield back onto Daisy, tying him tighter this time, and started toward the green line on the horizon. The creek was barely a trickle, but it was enough. I filled my canteen, soaked a cloth to wet Whitfield's lips, and let Daisy drink her fill. He was slipping away, his breathing shallow, his eyes unfocused. "Stay with me," I said, shaking him gently. "You don't get to die yet." He blinked, his voice a whisper. Elena, she's got your eyes, Ezra, and Sarah's heart. You'll see. His words were a lifeline, pulling me forward through the exhaustion and pain. I'd make it to Albuquerque, I'd find my family, and I'd make sure Whitfield lived long enough to give me every answer he owed me. The desert was a cruel mirror, reflecting every scar, every sin, every choice I'd made in my 35 years of hell. As I dragged Marcus Whitfield across the Nevada sands, his body lashed to a makeshift travois I'd fashioned from the natives' weapons and my tattered gear, I felt the weight of more than just his dying frame. I was carrying my past, my pain, and the fragile hope that my wife and daughter were waiting for me in Albuquerque. The sun was sinking, painting the sky blood red, and Whitfield's fever was burning hotter than the day itself. He was fading, but I wouldn't let him go. Not until he gave me everything. Every truth, every secret, every chance to make things right. Talk, I said, my voice rough from thirst and rage. You said you're dying. Why come after me? Why now? Whitfield's eyes fluttered open, glassy and distant, but he managed to focus on me. Cancer, he whispered, coughing blood onto his chin. Doctor in Richmond. Gave me 6 weeks. Been eating me alive. For months. His words were a shock, but they explained the desperation in his eyes. The way he'd risked everything to track me across this wasteland. A dying man with nothing left to lose, except the weight of his guilt. So, you're here to clear your conscience? I asked, my tone sharp. You think confessing to me makes up for what you did? He shook his head, a weak, pitiful motion. Not just that. Lena. She deserves to know her father. And Sarah. She made me promise. His voice broke, and for the first time, I saw tears in his eyes. The night she saved my life, she made me swear I'd tell you the truth. About everything. I stopped, the travois sinking into the sand. What are you talking about? My heart was pounding, a mix of dread and curiosity. Whitfield took a shuddering breath. 15 years ago, there was a fire at the plantation. Kitchen went up in flames, spread to the main house. I was trapped upstairs, choking on smoke. Sarah, she could have run, could have escaped in the chaos. Instead, she came for me, dragged me out, half dead, while the house burned. Then she collapsed, went into labor right there on the lawn. Lena was born in the dirt, with the flames roaring behind us. I couldn't breathe. The image of Sarah, brave and selfless, risking her life for this monster, it was too much. You're lying, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Whitfield shook his head. I wish I was. When Lena was born, Sarah looked at me, holding her baby, and said, "Promise me she'll grow up free." I swore I would. And then, like a coward, I broke that promise, sold them both the next day. His voice cracked, and he looked away, his face twisted with shame. Why? The word came out as a whisper, raw and broken. Why sell them? Why lie to me? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the darkening desert. Because I was scared, he said finally. Scared of losing control. Scared of what you'd do if you knew they were alive. My father, he owned slaves too. When I was 7, one of them tried to escape with his family. My father made me watch as he whipped them, made me tie the ropes, said it would teach me strength. I swore I'd never be like him, but fear. It turns you into what you hate most. The parallel hit me like a punch to the chest. 7 years old, the same age I was when Whitfield bought me. I'd been a boy, torn from my mother, sold to a man who saw me as less than human. And now he was telling me he'd been shaped by the same kind of cruelty. I wanted to hate him, to hold on to the simple, burning rage that had carried me through the years. But his words were chipping away at it, forcing me to see him as something more than a monster, a man, flawed, broken, and drowning in regret. I don't want your excuses, I said, my voice hard. I want my family. He nodded, his eyes closing. The letter, with my lawyer, it tells Lena everything. Who you are, what I did. If I don't make it, it'll reach her tomorrow. Her 16th birthday. Tomorrow. The word was a lifeline and a curse. My daughter would learn the truth, but only if I could keep Whitfield alive long enough to free her and Sarah from that damned contract. I pulled the travois harder, my shoulders screaming, my boots sinking into the sand. The green line I'd seen earlier was closer now, a faint promise of water. Whitfield's breathing was growing weaker, his words slurring into delirium. She planted daisies, he mumbled. Lena, Sarah taught her, writes letters. To you. Every week. My heart ached at the thought. My daughter, pouring her soul into words meant for me, a father she'd never known. I had to reach her. I had to make sure she knew I'd never abandoned her. The creek was a miracle, a thin ribbon of water cutting through the desert. I dropped to my knees, filling my canteen, splashing water on Whitfield's face. He stirred, his eyes focusing for a moment. Ezra, he whispered, you're a better man than I ever was. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. The man who'd destroyed my life was trying to give it back, piece by broken piece, and I didn't know if I could forgive him, or if I even wanted to. The adobe buildings of Albuquerque shimmered on the horizon like a dream I didn't dare believe. My shoulders burned from dragging the travois, my lips were cracked and bleeding, but I was close. So close. Marcus Whitfield was barely alive, his skin waxy, his breathing a faint rattle. The desert had tried to kill us both, but I'd fought it every step of the way, fought the heat, the natives, the thirst, and the ghosts of my past. All for Sarah. All for Lena. The red door on Calle del Sol was out there waiting, and with it, the family I'd thought I'd lost forever. Whitfield stirred, his voice a whisper. Promise me, Ezra, don't let Lena read that letter until you've told her the truth. Don't let her think you left her. His words were a plea, the last gasp of a man who knew his time was up. I nodded, too tired to speak. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. I could see the town now, the outlines of houses, the flicker of lanterns. We'd made it. Against all odds, we'd made it. The red door opened before I could knock. A man stepped out, middle-aged, Mexican, with kind eyes and a worried frown. He took one look at me, at the travois, at Whitfield's broken body, and called for help. Two other men appeared, lifting Whitfield and carrying him inside. But I barely noticed them, because there in the doorway was Sarah. My Sarah. 15 years older, with lines around her eyes that spoke of hard work and worry, but still the woman I'd loved since I was a boy. Her hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Ezra, she whispered, and the sound of my name on her lips broke something inside me. Sarah, I said, my voice cracking. We stood there, staring across a chasm of time and pain, neither of us moving, neither of us sure this was real. Then footsteps on the stairs made us turn. A girl descended, her movements graceful, her face a perfect blend of Sarah's beauty and my stubbornness. Lena, my daughter. Her eyes were sharp, curious, and filled with confusion as she looked from her mother to the stranger dragging a dying man into her home. Mama, she said, her voice soft but firm. Who is this man? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Lena, this is your father. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Lena's face shifted. Disbelief, hope, anger, all in the span of a heartbeat. My father's dead, she said quietly. You told me he died before I was born. Sarah's voice broke. I told you what I had to keep you safe, but he's been alive this whole time, thinking we were dead. From the back room, a weak voice called out, Ezra, come here. I followed the sound, my legs moving on instinct. Whitfield was propped up in a bed, a doctor working over his wounds, but we all knew it was too late. His eyes found mine, clear for the first time in hours. "Did you see her?" he asked. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" I nodded, my throat tight. Sarah did good raising her. He gestured to a leather satchel beside the bed. "Papers. In there. Sign them, and they're free. Sarah and Lena, free to go with you." I pulled out the documents, scanning them quickly. A contract binding Sarah and Lena to the Martinezes and a release that would void it. Whitfield took a pen, his hand shaking as he signed, each stroke a struggle. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why do this now?" "Because 15 years ago, your wife saved my life," he said. "And today, you saved mine. Maybe it doesn't balance the scales, but it's a start." Lena appeared in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me. "Is it true?" she asked. "Are you my father?" I nodded, unable to speak. "And you thought we were dead?" "Yes," I managed, my voice breaking. She studied me, her gaze piercing. "I have letters," she said softly. "Letters I wrote to you. Would you like to read them?" Before I could answer, Whitfield spoke, his voice a whisper. "Tell her about the daisies, Ezra. Tell her how Sarah sang to them. And tell her, I'm sorry." His eyes found Lena, and for a moment I saw something like love in them. "Sorry for stealing your childhood." Those were his last words. Marcus Whitfield died quietly, surrounded by the family he'd torn apart and, in the end, helped bring back together. 3 days later, we buried him in the Albuquerque cemetery. Lena insisted on placing daisies from her garden on his grave, a gesture that broke my heart and mended it all at once. She was Sarah's daughter, through and through, with a heart big enough to forgive. 2 weeks later, Sarah, Lena, and I rode west toward Oregon, carrying a bundle of letters that held 5 years of my daughter's thoughts, her dreams, her love for a father she'd never known. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time since I was 7, I wasn't traveling alone.